With more, we're joined by Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. It's great to have you back. Remarkable development today, but I guess not a very surprising one. A federal judge has paused the election interference prosecution against Donald Trump after Jack Smith made a request essentially to wind down the case. Is this now over?
It is basically over. There is a well-established principle through the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice that you do not pursue criminal prosecutions of sitting presidents, which Donald Trump is about to be once again. So it is to be expected that Jack Smith would start making moves in the DC case to wind that down. That's the election interference case. And again, also the Florida mishandling of classified documents and intelligence case will also no longer be a legal headache for Donald Trump.
Well, so obviously there's a lot of conversations that are thinking about how history could have been rewritten if decisions were made on different timelines, Elizabeth, including the departure of Joe Biden from his re-election campaign, but also how long it took to bring these cases in the first place. Was that the big misstep in this the multiple prosecutions of Donald Trump, as they just waited too long to bring the charges?
Well, I think, there's obviously a lot that can be said in hindsight, but, I think there were multiple avenues for accountability for Donald Trump here. Certainly in the jury box, he was held accountable for 34 felony counts in a New York courtroom with the New York jury. And also there was the ballot box, and he was voted out in 2020. But even with all the evidence about his attempt to overturn the 2020 election and fanning the flames of the January 6th insurrection, the voters spoke at the ballot box and decided not to hold him accountable with their votes. And so I think, whether the cases would have brought earlier or not, we knew so much of this evidence, particularly about the January 6th case, from the January 6th special committee. And also Jack Smith did file papers that, gave these facts to the American people. So the facts were out there largely through the January 6th special committee. He was already a convicted felon in the New York case. So I'm not sure that it would have necessarily mattered to the people who voted for him.
Well, I'm just curious, before we move on to another matter here, will there be a Smith report beyond anything that we've seen? Will there be a document that brings a comprehensive summary of the evidence to Americans?
Well, there is going to be some sort of update report on December 2nd. We don't know exactly what that will hold. But again, we're not there. There doesn't seem to be, at least, although, certainly if it's secret, then we wouldn't know that it doesn't exist. But, there doesn't seem to be some sort of secret trove of evidence that wasn't out there. It was very clear that Donald Trump did try to overturn the 2020 election based on what was already presented to the public through the January 6th committee and in Jack Smith's previous filings. So, we're not in a situation where a lot of that evidence is undisclosed at this point. It is out in the public. So even if there is a report, I don't think, again, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to carry anything that is earth-shattering that hasn't already been put out there by Jack Smith or the January 6th committee.
Well, and of course, so much about this entire case had changed already based on the decision of the Supreme Court that Donald Trump had at least partial immunity for official acts. And it's to the Supreme Court I'd like to go next, Elizabeth. Now that we know that Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States, he could pick more justices. He's reflected on the fact that he got to pick 3 in his last term during his first administration. Just take a listen.
We had a great presidency. 3 Supreme Court justices. Most people get none. You pick them young. This way they're there for 50 years, right? So, even if a president is there for 8 years, oftentimes they never have a chance. I had 3. It was sort of the luck of the draw.
That was Trump speaking on the Joe Rogan podcast a few weeks ago, Elizabeth. But it is true. He could appoint a justice for life. And now there's conversation about Democrats potentially trying to push for Sonia Sotomayor to retire so they could appoint her replacement quickly before the next Congress is sat. Would that work?
Well, I think it's helpful to correct a little bit of what Donald Trump said. It wasn't just luck of the draw that he got to appoint so many justices. He was aided significantly by the Republican Senate refusing to go through the confirmation process for Merrick Garland, who was President Obama's initial nominee to the Supreme Court. And so he did get an extra seat because of that. And I think that is a cautionary tale as we're talking right now about strategies about working to try to get someone quickly on the bench. And, Justice Sotomayor has been a fantastic member of the court and continues to be a fantastic member of the court. And there's no indication that she is thinking of retiring anytime soon. Now, certainly, Donald Trump has remade the Supreme Court and many of the lower courts already in his first term. And we are likely to see even more, even if not on the Supreme Court, conservative, younger jurists put on the bench. Right now, there is a 6-3 conservative supermajority, in part because of those picks made by Trump in his last administration. Mm-hmm. It seems unlikely that there would be any of the three more liberal justices retiring, but certainly if Justices Alito or Thomas were to retire, they'd be replaced by much younger, still just as conservative justices.
Well, that's why it strikes me that this is just different than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Justice Sotomayor is 70 years old. Why would she step down?
Yes, I think, she's a very active, very powerful in her writing, in her reasoning member of the court. And so I don't think there's, I certainly have not gotten any indication that she is thinking of stepping down. That's obviously her decision. Mm-hmm. She lives in the real world like the rest of us. So if she wants to make that calculation, she is perfectly able to make that calculation herself. And, I can see the justification for wanting to have someone who could be on the bench for, maybe 40 years or, 50 years, depending on how well they take care of themselves, by having someone new take her place. But she is a very powerful, effective member of the court. And, it is her decision to make.
Well, Donald Trump's not going to get another 40 years in office, Elizabeth. He'll get 4 of them, but he walks into that 4 having at his back the decision I mentioned earlier that he does have partial immunity for official acts taken as president. Can you just characterize the power that gives him as he gets ready to take the oath on January 20th?
Yes, so I think that speaking of Justice Sotomayor, the dissenters in that presidential immunity case laid out very well the extremely dangerous potential for what could happen with that sweeping, unprecedented immunity that the conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court has given Donald Trump. He's already telegraphed that he is not interested in following the dictates of the Constitution. And so knowing that he has this immunity given to him by his conservative Supreme Court certainly is only going to embolden him and not hold him back. But, the law exists. There are people who will be trying to hold him accountable to the law, going into the courts and asking them to serve their vital constitutional role as a check on the president, and hoping that the courts live up to that. Although with that decision that you mentioned about sweeping presidential immunity for official acts, there's reason to be skeptical that the Supreme Court is up to the task of being that check on the president. But nonetheless, that is their job under the Constitution, and it's appropriate for Americans to demand that they live up to that role.
All right, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, thank you for joining us.